Is it a small thing for you to weary man? But will ye weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and thou shalt call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us.
Going back and forth. The biggest issue I had with you, let me sort of repeat my argument again, was I don't need to come from any sort of perspective to ask you a question as to why this makes sense. Just because you can say, oh, it doesn't make sense in the Quran, or Judaism says this, I want you to answer that with your own ideology, with your philosophy, right? And use your sources for that. You don't need to start quoting Islam, you don't need to start talking about the Quran.
Okay, so firstly, you came to ask me a question, I answered your question, and then you wanted to have a conversation, and that's why we're having a conversation. And in a conversation, it goes backwards and forwards, and the point that I've made to you that you keep missing, Mustafa, and I'll make it to you again, is that Muslims use Christian arguments to get Islam out of the very problem you're trying to put Christianity in a fickle sovereign God. I believe in a loving God, and as you know, love will mean that you will do things that are beneath you. Doesn't mean that you've somehow lost your dignity, but that you do things that are beneath you because of your love. And that's exactly what we believe God did. We're not saying that these things weren't beneath God. We're saying they were beneath God, but God does them anyway because of his love. And that is a far more appealing God in my eyes than a tyrant, fickle, who sits on a throne and only ever speaks to you through letters and emails and messengers. Yeah.
So the reasons why I'm not answering the questions of the veil, there's all these other questions that you're asking me. It was you that was counting down. You were like, oh, going once, going twice, who's got a question?
Yeah.
I asked you the question of limitation and God.
Correct.
Yeah, I didn't even mention about me being a Muslim and me wanting to answer these questions. You're more than aware of like Islam and our views of limitations of God and what we believe, right? I simply asked you the limitations of God. That's the only question that I asked you. So for you to come back and rebuttal and say, oh, you have to answer my questions, you're not answering my questions, you're not listening, you're new to this, how many wives do you have? We're not talking about that. The initial discussion was you were counting down, and I said to you, I've got a question about Jesus, about his limitations of God, and that was my question. You're asking me about, the Quran, you're asking me about all these sorts of things. The veil, and yeah, you said I've probably got 4 wives, probably.
I didn't say that.
Well, you said how many have I got?
I said wives or wife, depending on how many wives you've got.
And again, it's relevant. It's not relevant at all. And it's just the question that I initially wanted answering is still not sufficiently answered. Now you can say you've answered it, and if it's not good enough for you, so be it. I don't think it's good enough for anyone here. I forgot my keys once. I remembered where it was. How is that applicable to the oneness of God and his true nature of being, all-knowing, no need of water, no independent, it doesn't answer the question. You can't give me an example of a human sort of characteristic that would make me believe that, oh, you know what, Jesus came here, and yeah, he can be limited and unlimited at the same time. It's a contradiction to me, and for that reason, Bob, I don't really believe that. So you can bring up the Quran and the veil. I don't even need to be Muslim or have a faith to have that sort of question. So you can bring up the veil, you can bring up the Quran, and how are they coincide? It matters none. I can come here as an atheist and ask you that question. Just because you're answering questions that you're pretty knowledgeable, and you can slide your way in and out of these sort of you can word yourself out of it and try and...
I'll take that as a backhanded compliment.
Well, whatever. You can take it how you want, but in my opinion, it still doesn't answer the question. You can throw stones from glass houses all you want, but for me, it doesn't answer the question. You still haven't given me an example of how God can limit himself and that be logically making any sense. So what stops God from dying? Can he die for us? Can he fail to exist as the Father, the Spirit, everything?
Can I reply?
I mean, please show me sort of like evidence of how God could do that, because to me it would go outside of his godship to do it, and that's the question you haven't answered. outside of his godship, he can't do these things because he wouldn't be God. If God was to say, you know what, I'm going to decide I'm not going to have all knowledge for eternity, or I'm going to be limited, I'm going to have a short time here, and I'm not going to be divine and unlimited. What's stopping your ideology from believing that?
Can I reply? Right, so the first point, I want to point out again, you've not addressed the issue of the veil or the issue of the Quran. Wait one second. Wait.
I mentioned
Mustafa,
I don't need to answer that.
If you're getting tired,
no, I'm not getting
if you're getting tired, if it's getting too much for you, just take a step out, bro.
I answered that. I said to you, I don't
if you're going to interrupt, the whole conversation will break down. And I guarantee you'll sulk if I start interrupting you. Everyone who interrupts me always does. Right, thank you. So, I'll just point out again, Mustafa, you haven't addressed the point of the veil and the Quran. Why is it pertinent to your original question? Because these are examples in Islam of Allah limiting himself. Because his attributes are not him, but they are not separate from him. In other words, there cannot be a universe that exists in which Allah's word or Allah's glory exists independent from the existence of Allah himself. In other words, they are dependent existences. And so if Allah is limiting his word as he does in ink and paper, or he limits his glory as he does with the veil that he creates, then Allah has limited an attribute. And we are talking about an attribute, the knowledge, or more particular, if you had listened carefully, Mustafa, we're not even talking about whether God in the incarnation limits his possession of divine knowledge. We're pointing out that God in the incarnation limits access. So it's the attribute of access to divine knowledge that is being limited, not knowledge itself. I hope I'm being really clear now. And I have answered this question several times, but I'll do it again. In what way can God limit himself? You asked. The way that he does it in a way that doesn't sustain a contradiction is this. By taking to himself a human nature that does not change his divine nature, if the limitations are encapsulated in the human nature, then that is how, and he experiences those limitations in that human nature, then that is how God can limit himself without change. But now let me ask you this question. How does Allah limit his glory by something that he creates, and that not be the, how is that not the same by God limiting his access to divine knowledge by veiling himself in flesh?
That's all?
Yeah, of course.
Right, Bob, you're saying to me that I'm not listening, right? I don't think you're listening to me. The point that I was making was I can come from an atheistic position, right? You don't need to give examples of Islam, of Judaism, of any type of ism, right? I'm coming to you with a question. Yeah. Islam's not going to help you here, right? Islam's not going to help you. Nothing's going to, I could be believing in evolution or whatever, right? It's not going to help you, right? I'm asking a question where you don't need to say, oh, in the Quran or in Islam, look, there's this same ideology problem, there's this same contradicting problem. You don't need to say that.
What's the question, brother? I want to hear the question. What's the question?
If you draw him in, let's just finish our conversation. Yeah.
I have a issue myself. I have to just focus, especially when you're talking for about 10 minutes.
I promise you I'm not.
Write it down, man.
I promise you I'm not.
Like 10 minutes when he's talking. I don't know. And it's a lot of questions, and it's a lot of going back and forth. The biggest issue I had with you, let me sort of repeat my argument again, was I don't need to come from any sort of perspective to ask you a question as to why this makes sense. Just because you can say, oh, it doesn't make sense in the Quran or Judaism says this, I want you to answer that with your own ideology, with your philosophy, right? And use your sources for that. You don't need to start quoting Islam, you don't need to start talking about the Quran, oh, the veil of God. And the reason, again, you mentioned it, which is again a sign that you're not listening, bro. You said to me, "Oh, you didn't answer my questions about the veil. You didn't do this about. I asked you this, I asked you that." That wasn't. I came here. You were the one counting down. Again, I have to repeat myself. This is just. It's almost like people are watching this and just like keep repeating the same bit. I have to repeat myself because you're the one not listening. We're not going anywhere. We're going around in circles. I came to you and asked the question. I said to you, the limitations of God. Where do you draw the line? And one of the things you didn't address necessarily, I said, can God become a tree? Can God do this? What is the end of his limitation? How far can he take it? Because one of them is he can limit himself, he can in knowledge and all the rest of it, right? He can be dependent. How far can he take that down? Can he fail to exist completely? Right? That's one of the questions that I directly asked you. I said, can he be a tree? To what extent can he lower his godship? That's something you were talking for like 15, 20 minutes it seems.
Didn't answer.
And mate, you were just waffling on and waffling on. You didn't answer none of it. You kept talking about the veil and all the rest of it. You didn't answer nothing I said. You're saying that I'm not listening. I said to you, I don't need to talk about the veil. That's not the conversation at hand. You keep trying to make it comparable to Islam. Forget Islam, man. We're talking about Christianity here. This is your belief system. Can you not defend your belief system without saying, oh, the Quran is this, the Quran is that?
Can I reply?
So the questions that I want you to directly answer, firstly, I don't need to talk about the Quran. Just imagine I'm coming from a perspective of no religion, right? I'm asking you I'm guessing you're a Christian, right? To what extent?
What gave it away?
To what extent can God sort of take down his sort of divinity? How low can he take it? Is my question to you.
Okay.
Without you asking me the veil, this, that, because like I said to you, I don't need to answer that. That's not the topic of discussion. We're talking about Christianity here. We're talking about the limitations of God. And I'm asking you directly, how low can he take it?
Can I reply?
Of course.
Okay. So firstly, you came to ask me a question, I answered your question, and then you wanted to have a conversation, and that's why we're having a conversation. And in a conversation, it goes backwards and forwards. And the point that I've made to you that you keep missing, Mustafa, and I'll make it to you again, is that Muslims use Christian arguments to get Islam out of the very problem you're trying to put Christianity in, and that's exactly why the example of the veil and the example of the Quran are relevant. I know your Kalam better than you do. I know your deen better than you do. And it's incumbent upon me to try and educate you and to help you, right? Because pride in our muscles is not the same as pride in our intellect, right? And we shouldn't have pride at all. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is if you can't answer the very question you're asking, when the very question you're asking puts Islam in a problem, or rather, and this is more pertinent to the original question, you can't see the parallel of the answer that I gave to defend the Christian position as already existing in the Islamic position. To get Islam out of the very conundrum that your question would put it in, then there's no helping you, bro, Mustafa. Like, you're just not able to follow an argument. Now, to answer your question, how far can God limit his divinity? Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Which is better than you because you haven't got there at all. You haven't answered one of my questions, and you haven't been able to answer one of my questions because when you try to answer one of the questions, your whole argument becomes unstuck. Right? And that, my friend, is not waffles. That's just facts. Now,
can you answer
I'm going to.
It's been like 5 minutes.
But if I interrupt you, you'll complain. So don't interrupt. Don't interrupt, because I'll start interrupting you. The whole conversation break. Are you sure?
You can do that.
Okay, great. So now, to answer your question directly, God limits his nature God limits his divinity in human nature according to his nature. His nature is love.
What was my question?
His nature, how low can that limitation go? You've got to pay attention, Mustafa. I'm answering that question. If you interrupt less, you'll hear the answer. Yeah?
I've interrupted twice now.
Yeah, multiple
and I'm
times.
trying to direct you to
Multiple
the question I asked
times.
about 10 minutes ago.
Multiple times.
I'm literally just trying to direct you.
And I hope you remember this behavior when I start interrupting
how low
you.
Can God take it?
So now let me ask, so to answer your question, he does so according to his nature. His nature is love, and the object of his creation, the object of his love is man. And so he limits himself to the form of man. That's how low it goes. Now let me ask you a question again. How can it be that Allah's glory can be limited by a veil that Allah creates?
You done, yeah? You feel free to interrupt me if I'm saying anything that
I will.
Feel free to.
Against my question.
No problem.
So what was my question?
The question was about the veil and how does that sort of. I have a contradiction problem because if I'm saying
The question is, I'll state it again because you didn't hear it because you're not listening. How can Allah limit his glory? And I answered that. I said human. You heard it. There you go. That's twice now. So you see, if you pay attention, Mustafa, it helps. So in terms of the question, my question is this: how can Allah create a veil that limits His glory? That's the question.
So, like I said, you didn't answer. You said, how low can it go, right? And you said human form is the lowest it can go.
Which is the answer to the question.
So that's
Thank
the
you.
answer to the question.
There we go. I'm glad we agree. So now my question?
Why can't he become a tree?
What's my question?
Why can't he become a pigeon? Why
Answering.
Can't he become
That's not my question. What's my question?
That's what I asked you. You
What's
said
my
you
question?
answered it, and I said, how low can God go?
And I answered that. I said human. There you go. Thank you. So you've admitted that I did answer the question. So now you answer my question. So now you answer my question. And the question is, how does Allah create a veil that limits His glory?
You haven't answered my question.
Go on, answer that question.
Answer my question fully.
You know what? You're running, Mustafa, from the question.
What's stopping God from being a tree?
Mustafa, you're running from the question.
I'm really not. I asked
Mustafa,
you a question.
you're running from the question.
Answered it, and I'm trying to.
What was the question?
The question that I asked you.
What was the question I asked you? What was the question I asked you, Mustafa? What was the question I asked you?
It's hard to follow you.
What was the question I asked you? No, you did. You repeated the question, so you did follow me. So now you're lying.
You asked me.
This is just rhetoric, Mustafa. Answer the question. Yes, so answer the question. Answer the question about the veil. I've answered your question. You asked me how low can it go. I said human, and you repeated the answer, thus demonstrating that I'll do that next. That demonstrates that I did answer the question. So now you answer my question. How can Allah create a veil that limits His infinite glory?
So you haven't answered my question.
You're running from the question, Mustafa.
If I'm saying to you,
you're running from the question. Answer the question that I asked you. What's the question I asked you?
You're talking for 10
Answer the question I asked you. And you've demonstrated that I answered that question.
Human.
Look, Mustafa, this conversation, exactly as predicted, when you said we can just interrupt one another, has now broken down.
No, it hasn't.
It has, because I've demonstrated that you're not answering the question.
All it's done now is I'm highlighting the fact that
I've answered the question by repeating my answer, but you have failed to answer the question that I've asked you, and I don't blame you.
Answer that after.
And the reason why I don't blame you is because Islam is intellectually bankrupt.
Okay.
And the Dawagandists and these Dawagandist arguments are built on double standards. They're built on straw-manning Christianity and not even having an appreciation of your own deen, as you, my brother, have amply demonstrated.
To you from the very beginning. Let me say one thing.
No. It's up to him whether you get to come into this conversation. I think we're finishing.
We're done.
Right. We are indeed done. We are indeed done.
My initial response was, you asked if there's a question. You didn't say, do you want to have a debate? Do you want to have a conversation back and forth where we're not going to interrupt each other? Bob, I come up to you and I said to you, I was asking you about the limitations. My question hasn't changed. Right? I said to you, why can't
I answered it multiple times.
How low can it go?
I answered it multiple times. I answered it multiple times.
You didn't say it.
No, I really did, and the cameras will show it. The camera evidence will demonstrate that this is just rhetoric. All you've got is empty air and loud noise. You haven't been able to answer a single question. Mustafa, shall we bring this to a stop? Because it's not going anywhere anymore.
No, because you're not answering
You
the
look after
question,
yourself.
man. Take care, Bob.
Take care. Right. Do you two want to come in now?
No, I was just asking a question.
Sorry?
I was asking a question.
What's your question?
No, when you guys were talking, for the ones I couldn't understand, what was the purpose of his question? What did he mean by limits?
So can I?
Well, that's a question for him, not for me. Do you want to ask me a question?
I have just a brief question.
Yeah, go on.
It's going to be very brief.
What was the purpose of the question? Just so we can
In the Christian doctrine,
Yeah.
you don't follow.
are you Trinitarian, Unitarian?
There's only, brother, that's like asking, do you worship Muhammad? Do you don't worship
No,
Muhammad?
because if you said if I'm Shia Sunni, I just want to say
No, hold on one second. That question is like asking a Muslim, do you worship Muhammad?
Fine. It's not a relevant question.
Is it relevant to Islam if I ask you, do you worship Muhammad?
I would say no.
Exactly. So ask a sensible question.
Fine, my sensible question is, because I've seen it shown to some Trinitarians, they
Yeah.
say that the Father's the greatest, and then they say the Son and the Holy Spirit are lesser. Some people say it's equal,
Yeah.
and some people say, oh, those people aren't Trinitarians, so I don't want to cast any accusations. I just want to get a basis. I don't want to insult you, that's hence my question. Let you say your stance. So I didn't mean to insult you, I'm very sorry if that came as
Okay, so to answer your question,
I haven't finished it.
oh sorry, go on.
Do you believe that the Father is the greatest, and why? If so, why? Do you believe there's a hierarchy among the Trinity? I think is the crux of the question. Is there a hierarchy among the Trinity? Is the Father at the top, or is someone else at the top? Or are they co-equal? That's pretty much it. Is it a hierarchy, co-equal?
Okay, so to answer your question, as a Christian, I'm not committed, nor do I need to defend imaginative Christians, fictional Christians, or ignorant Christians. And so whether your Christians are imaginative, fictional, or just ignorant, I don't need to defend their position. I only need to defend the Christian position. And the Christian position is that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are co-equal. Now, at the incarnation, Jesus says
Can you define incarnation? Sorry, I don't mean to.
well, okay.
I just want to follow along.
Do you want to do question for question?
No, I just want to follow along and understand.
Okay, so fair enough, that's fine.
Thank you.
So by the incarnation, what we mean is that the divine Logos, the eternal Word of God, takes to himself a human form and fills it with his person. That is literally what we mean by the incarnation. It literally means to be tabernacled or to be intented in flesh. Like, in the same way, and this is the point that Mustafa didn't understand, in the same way that Muslims believe that the Quran that is in a box in my bedroom is literally the eternal word of Allah, but yet it is coexistent in time and space, in a book, on paper and ink, inside a box, in a room, in London. Now, that is what we mean by the incarnation. So to continue my original answer, to continue with my answer, now that I've explained what incarnation is, at the incarnation, the Son takes the form of a servant. He takes the form of a man, which is obviously less than God.
Limited, more limited.
It is limited, of course.
Yeah, I'm agreeing.
Yes, absolutely, it's limited. And so when Christ is in the at the incarnation, Christ rightly says the Father is greater than I.
Yeah,
because the Father is not incarnated, the Son is incarnated, and as we both agree, the human position is lower than the divine position, but the hierarchy exists because of the human nature, not because of the divine nature.
Fantastic, thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. So when we say hierarchy, because they're co-equal, there isn't really a hierarchy as such. It's just because of the incarnation aspect.
Yeah.
So I guess my question now, and it's purely from an understanding perspective, and that's why we all ask questions.
Fair enough.
Is if Christ was limited,
Thank you.
well, he was limited. He was.
No one's disputing that.
No, he was limited.
Yeah.
Is there an argument to say that Christ is lesser than the Father because he was limited at some point in time? Bear in mind, let's say you and me have been the top tennis champions.
I'll get the question without the analogy. I can answer it without the analogy.
I just want to say,
Fair enough, go on.
It helps me.
Sure,
and it helps us
absolutely.
stick to
Go
it.
for it, yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
We've been the top two contenders. We've been joint in tennis, right? You break your arm, you can't play tennis anymore.
Yeah.
You're limited.
Yeah.
In the game of tennis.
Yes.
Again, I don't want to, in the game of tennis, you're limited. Can someone can make the argument that you were lesser than me because for a fixed period of time, and you could say that was the duration of Christ's lifetime? I guess that's fair to say. The duration of Christ's lifetime didn't have godly attributes, therefore wasn't God, and therefore is less lesser than God because of the time delta, right? One was God for much longer, had full attributes, would never relinquish godliness, godhood, whereas the other one did in the incarnation phase.
Can I reply?
Just let me wrap up. So bringing back to our
Just you're making a number of errors that I have to correct.
You can, but again, we're having the civil discussion.
Of course.
If that's okay, we can respect that. So my question, the crux of it is, and I don't really want to talk about Islam and things because it is purely an understanding point of view, is if Christ was limited for a certain period of time, for the duration of the incarnation, can you make the argument that he was less than God? If so, if not, why not?
So the answer is, I've got to correct a number of errors that you made.
Okay.
So Christians don't believe that Christ put off divine attributes to enter into his humanity. That's an erroneous doctrine called kenosis, and Christians don't believe in that.
I'm just going to
right? So Christ maintains unchanged, unconfused, unmingled, and in a continuous way all of his divine attributes. But he takes to himself limitations in a humanity.
Is that during the incarnation?
In the incarnation. And as a human, Christ himself says, not me, Christ himself says that the Father is greater than I. But that is not talking about his divine nature. That is talking about his position as a human being. Now, this conversation isn't just going to be about Christianity, it's going to be about Islam as well.
You can make it that. I'm just
that's fine. That's fine. I also want to ask questions. I also want to learn in the spirit of understanding. Perhaps you can answer the question Mustafa didn't answer.
I'll try.
Now, are you two like cheerleaders? Like you two in a tag team?
You mentioned
No,
me.
it's okay.
Right. So here's the question.
Just backtrack 2 minutes and then we can.
Yeah. So the question that I want to ask you is, how does Allah create a veil?
Sorry, you didn't
that
answer the original question.
No one. I did. I said in his human nature.
Okay.
So in his human unglorified nature, Christ himself says the Father is greater than I.
Okay.
Now that is not talking about his divinity.
Right, so
that is the answer.
Fantastic.
Now my question to you is, how does Allah create a veil, so it's a created thing that now has the power to limit his infinite divine glory?
Okay, that's absolutely fine. I'm satisfied with your answer from a Christian theological perspective. And again, just to summarise from my understanding, before I go on to my answer, is that during the incarnation, Christ didn't lose any divine attributes.
Correct.
He didn't give away anything.
Correct. Nothing changed. Nothing was mingled. Nothing is to be confused. Nothing was mixed.
There was no dual nature, divine nature, human nature.
So there's no. So
because I hear a lot of things. I just want to
we've got to be clear about our words.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I'm trying to be clear.
Please.
So what we say is, without confusion, without mingling,
Yes.
and without change, and without separation.
Right.
Right? Now, by analogy, to help you understand what I mean by that,
Yeah, let's go back to
it's
that.
exactly the same. My analogy for the incarnation is your doctrine about the Quran. You believe that the Quran is the eternal word of Allah.
I believe anything.
Well, actually, I did make an assumption there. I apologise. Maybe you're not a Muslim. But
maybe I'm asking from a.
Yeah, maybe. But maybe you're not a Muslim. Maybe you say that Allah.
Maybe this argument's hypothetical as well.
Yeah. So, but as Muslims believe.
But it shouldn't be relevant.
I'm still. One second.
It's not.
No, it is relevant. It really is relevant.
You can come back and make it relevant.
Yeah, it really is relevant.
Please.
So the analogy that I'm using to demonstrate what I've just said about the incarnation is the Muslim doctrine, which I suspect you believe, which is that the Quran is literally the eternal word of Allah that can be found on ink and paper. And all those people in Saudi Arabia that flushing Qurans down the toilet, what they're doing is that they're damaging ink and paper. They're not damaging the eternal word of Allah, because the two never are separate. They can't be talked about as being separate things, but they're not mixed, they're not mingled, and they're not to be confused.
Okay, fine. So, and I guess this comes back to the fact that you said that there's no intermingling between the non-divinity and the divinity nature.
Yeah, they're not mingled.
Christ. Not mingled, but during the incarnation, what's the best label to give Christ while he walks on this earth? While he says the Father's greater than I am.
Yeah.
Is it divine or is it human?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. The answer is exactly what the church has taught for over 2,000 years. Sorry, not over 2,000 years, which is that Christ is fully man and fully God. And we've taught that conclusively and for millennia.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
You know?
But if it's both, how can they not intermingle?
Let him ask all of his questions, Faraz, and then you can jump in.
If it's not intermingling, how can it be fully man and fully God? That contradicts to me.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
Well, let me.
For me, it does. Please.
For example, there's many examples in nature where things have dual properties.
Yeah.
So light has the property of wave and particle. I'm sure you know what the triple point of, what a triple point is in terms of a chemical substance.
Yes.
It has properties of solid, liquid, and gas all at the same time.
Yes.
So this is, if we can envision that in creation, your choice is to either accuse the creator of creating a contradictory creation, or to accept that things can have multiple properties in multiple different properties simultaneously at the same point in time. And so there's no contradiction entailed. Now, my question to you, I noticed, was not answered.
No, I wanted to finish that point.
My question to you, my question remains to you unanswered,
Please repeat.
which is this: how does Allah create a veil that limits his eternal infinite glory?
We get to the veil part. I have to say, when you refer to the veil, I don't know what you're talking about.
It's the shank.
You can elaborate like you did with incarnation.
Okay, so in Al-Tirmidhi, right, it says that when Muhammad goes up to the highest heavens, and he goes,
Say that it doesn't contradict the doctrine because God is not limiting the destructive capability that he has, in the sense that he destroys everything he can see. But we would say that God simply does not want to destroy everything that he can see, and therefore this veil, which may not be a physical thing, which may not be a creation, hopefully you can appreciate that. It could be a rhetorical idea or a concept of God not wanting to destroy all of creation because he loves us, because it's not within his divine plan. Again, to speculate about the reasons of God is, we can do it all day. But that would be the crux of the argument. The ability and the desire of an action are two very different things. God has the supreme will to do both, or any, or one. And that brings us to the argument that this idea of a veil does not contradict the idea of God and his all-powerfulness, because at the end of the day, God placed this veil there in an attempt for whatever his desire was.
Can I reply?
He used the ability to cast the veil.
You're doing fine, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's my first time. I'm sorry. You can tell. He used the ability to cast the veil because of a desire not to destroy. But he didn't use his ability to destroy because he didn't desire.
Can I reply now?
I think I've made my point. So
Yeah,
please.
and thank you very much for actually trying to tackle the question. I do appreciate. No, you've done a very good tackling
Thanks
of the
for
question.
listening as well.
But the problem with your argument is this. Now, obviously, it depends what kind of Muslim you are, and obviously, if you belong to one of the groups of Muslims that deny the veil as a real thing, and interpret this is where we need to pin you down, because depending on which kind of Muslim you are, because your argument essentially says that the Hadith's description of a veil is purely metaphorical.
I didn't say that.
Wait. Right.
I just want to correct you.
I'll say the same thing that I said to Mustafa. If we interrupt one another, the whole conversation is going to break down, yeah? And so I would ask you not to interrupt.
My fault.
Because I didn't interrupt you.
It's my first time. Sorry.
Right. So, the argument that you've made, whether you like the consequences of the argument or not, is simply this. If your argument is to be sustained as the answer, and by the way, I think it's a very creative answer.
Thank you.
But if it is to be sustained, it logically follows that you have to deny the veil as an actual thing. And if you're denying the veil as an actual thing and you're turning it into a metaphor for a decision of God, right? That God is making a sovereign decision over his attributes, right? Then that means you have to argue that the veil is not real. But the problem with that is that that is not what the hadiths say. The hadiths speak, and Muhammad speaks very categorically about the veil being an actual thing, not simply a word metaphor for a concept.
Fine.
Right?
I don't know. So.
But here's where the contradiction rubs. So listen carefully. This is the crucial bit. The hadith states that the veil stops the glory of Allah, destroying the whole of creation as far as the eyes of Allah can see. If Allah can see the veil and Allah created the veil, then why does the glory of Allah not destroy the veil as well? That's the contradiction. Now, your answer is very creative.
Thank you.
It is a sustainable argument. I'm helping you now because it's your first time. If you hold that line of argument, you are going to get out of my problem.
I know.
Right? So I want to ask you, do you deny the veil as a real thing and interpret the hadiths, all the hadiths that talk about the veil, as a real thing, as being simply a metaphor for a decision of God? Is that what you actually believe? Is that your hack? Is that your deen? Because if you're willing to commit to that, then we'll progress the conversation along those lines.
Right, so first I'll come back to my original point. Again, there was a misconception on your end. I didn't suggest that the veil was metaphysical. I said it could be, because I don't know at this state of time. I haven't read the hadith from Tirmidhi. I would love to see the reference so I could study it later. So if you could provide it, that would be great. But that's for later. I didn't say it was metaphysical. I said it could be. And I think that's different from saying it is something. You know, I can say you're wearing green. I could say you're wearing a turquoisey colour. You know, could different. Could be a physical thing, could be a metaphysical thing. And I did specifically state that the notion of it being physical or metaphysical really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because of the argument that you called it creative, of God's desire to do something being different to God executing something. So, and to bring that back into a point, is that if the veil was physical, like you're arguing, like you suggest the hadith say, and again, I can't confirm that as the haqq because I haven't studied it myself. It would be foolish of me to say this is the haqq.
If you tell me what kind of Muslim you are, I might be able to tell you what your deen teaches. Right, which kind of Sunni?
In what sense?
Are you Salafi? Okay. Hanafi.
You should have asked what school I belong to.
Well, that's a school of fiqh.
Yeah. Let's find Hanafi. I'll give you the answer.
Okay, fair enough. Well, in my understanding, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but the Hanafi position is that the veil is a real thing.
Okay, I will study that. I'll learn.
And feel free to come back and correct me, because I'm not 100% certain of that myself.
That's okay. But
for instance, I know Muhammad Hijab is Hanafi, or very close to Hanafi, and he believes that the veil is a created thing. Hashim is Hanafi, I believe.
These are just guys, by the way. I may not subscribe to their.
Granted. But my point is, until someone proves otherwise, I'm working on the assumption that the Hanafi believe that the veil is an actual thing, not simply a metaphor for a concept.
So let's draw the benchmark. This argument is based on an assumption.
Yes.
Because you just said, you've used the word assumption.
Yes.
Because I come from a mathematical background, we do proofs.
Yep.
You start a proof by an assumption, right?
Agreed.
N equals 1, N equals 1.